Well, hey everybody, Brian Goulet here, back. First episode of Q&A in 2020. It is episode number 279, and today I'm going to be talking to you about what would happen after I try every single pen and ink we carry. Would I still love them, or would it be over? What are some of my favorite discontinued pens and the most polarizing pen, ink, and paper that we sell? Really looking forward to this week. I took some much needed time off to spend some time with my family around the holidays, so thank you for not missing what we were doing here too much, but we were able to get some great videos out in the meantime while we were gone. Now we're getting back into the swing of things here in January of 2020. Thinking about like New Year's resolutions and stuff like that. I've never been like hardcore into New Year's resolutions. But I did set one last year to kind of rekindle my woodworking passion. That was the original passion that kind of got me into the fountain pen thing to begin with. And it had really been a number of years since I'd done that. So I'd kind of loosely set a goal in one of the early right nows of last year to just address that more. I did definitely do some woodworking throughout the year. I've got some other kind of projects that are in the works. So that one is kind of continuing for me. I'm not really doing any one specific thing, you know, as this year's New Year resolution that is much different. But then again, most people abandon them anyway, right? So I could really just make up anything and then give it up in February, right? Anyway, no, I'm just kidding. So some of the things that have been going on here recently, Drew and I did a right now about the new Yovo made Monteverde and Conklin nibs. Put that out on Wednesday, explain those a little bit. Hopefully that was somewhat helpful to you. We're still going to be using them and kind of learning them. Obviously they'll be getting out there into your hands, and more information will get out there about them, but they're a completely different manufacturer than what they used to be. So I'm thinking that you're going to like them pretty much. So that's kind of interesting, so you can check those out. All of the, with the exception of the Conklin Empire, which we only have a few of those left, every other Conklin and Monteverde pen that we have now will come with those new steel Yovo nibs, with the exception of the OmniFlex nib. That is still not made by Yovo. So yeah, been overdue on restocking some of those. There were definitely some delays. We had a free ink deal available on those pens throughout the holidays, and we didn't have any pens. So we're extending the free ink deal just because that seems like the fair thing to do. So anyway, you can learn more about that on our site. ST DuPont, I kind of mentioned that a little bit before I left. Got more of those in. I've been inking them up and playing with them. Definitely more of a luxury brand. Been kind of a sleeper brand for the last 10 years or so. Their old distributor was Davidoff. You know, nice enough people, but they were cigar people. ST DuPont does both cigars and pens, cigar lighters, I should say, and pens. So these are some of the pens. So we're starting out just with the Line D. That's the pen model we're starting out with. And then they'll be expanding more. From what I understand, they are excited about leaning more into the fountain pen community, coming out with some more innovative things. So that's pretty exciting because the quality of their pens is really pretty phenomenal. They're made in France, and it's interesting because they actually use, especially on their Line Ds here, they're using Urushi lacquer on these pens, which is not something you see very often. And usually when you do, it's like, you know, a Japanese company, like Namiki, or, you know, you may every now and then see a special edition or limited edition from, you know, Sailor or Pelican is what I'm thinking of. But it's not often that you see like a regularly available, regularly manufactured Urushi pen, especially over a metal body like this. So very high quality, nice colors and stuff like that. They write really great. Their nibs are made by Bach, but they're made specifically for ST DuPont. So they are not using, you know, just a standard stock nib. So it's kind of on their own accord. And the nibs so far, I've written with all of them as I've been doing the Nib Nook writing samples, and they write really, really good. And then of course the capping mechanism, just got that really crisp click, very firm click. It's very nice. It's supposed to kind of emulate the feel that you would have with one of their cigar lighters. That's kind of their deal. So two different sizes of them, a large size and a medium size. These pens are going to be a little more expensive, up in the $700-800 range, maybe a little bit more, depending on which model you're going with. But they are super, super nice. So just so you can kind of be aware that those are out there. Some other new pens that we had come in. So this one we've been waiting for a while. This is called Mayora. And that's kind of interesting because it's not a brand that you've probably heard of before. But if you've heard of Natuno, it's the same manufacturer behind Natuno. So some former people from Delta, which is a now non-existing pen company. So there you may kind of see some hints or some elements of it. But here, this is the Mayora Imprante. So this is a new pen that is coming out, brand new pen. But it looks like they're using Jowo steel nibs. So as I'm writing with them, I'm very pleased. They're writing very nice. They're kind of big pens, nice big fat grips, which definitely kind of feels like some of the old Deltas, but not a super heavy pen. So that's actually really nice. It's very comfortable to write with. It's a number 6 nib, just to give you an idea of how big the rest of the pen is in comparison. This is not the converter that comes on it, I realize as I'm unscrewing it, because I usually cycle through my converters as I'm doing Nibnook writing samples. But it comes with a nicer looking, like metal shrouded converter. If I can find it, here it is. Boom. Standard International, threaded. So a little classy, but pretty nice, right in the $200 range. So kind of on that upper end of a steel nib pen, but very, very solid and nice performing writers. So excited to get to talk about them a little bit more as we enter into the new year. We've had a lot of notebooks come in from Leuchtturm, A5 ones in the neon. There's 3 different colors of neon. I don't have it here to show you, but you can check them on the site. They're pretty bright. I haven't gotten in and gotten a hold of every new product. I've only been here at this point a little less than 3 days, so I'm trying to get back up to speed and everything. And then some other new colors that came in, Sage, Powdered Denim, and Bellini. So some nice kind of like pastel colors. So you get like the super bright neon colors or the more subtle pastel colors. But either way, Leuchtturm's got some nice looking stuff that's coming out right now. Then another pen that is really interesting is the Monteverde First Step. Not the timeliest of launches, but anyway, it is themed around the moon landing, which happened in July of last year. Because of the nib delays and stuff, it delayed this pen. But what's interesting about this is it is reverse painted. So they have these tiny little brushes that they get into the barrel of the pen, and they paint this entire image by hand in reverse painting, which if you've ever looked into that or know anything about that historically, a lot of times it's done on glass, but very rarely on the inside of a pen. Monteverde used to have a Disney Fantasia pen years ago that was reverse painted as well. I think this might be the first one they've done since then. It's been a number of years, but it's a very cool looking pen. It's kind of big. Personally, I don't love the cap. This, it looks a little stubby to me, but if I kind of take the cap off, the pen itself is rather large, but it's also kind of light, like the Mayora, and it's actually a pretty comfortable writer. So if you're into the space theme stuff and you want kind of a nice light daily writer and be able to carry it around and kind of commemorate that moon landing, that one's worth taking a look at. It's almost $200, which I find that one to be kind of polarizing. I mentioned that was going to be one of the theme of one of the questions today. It's too early to tell how polarizing this particular pen is, so that one's not on my list. But anyway, that one I found can be polarizing, at least around our office. Some people are like, this is the greatest thing ever. Other people are like, yeah, I'm never going to buy that. So to each their own. And then some stuff that's going to be coming soon. TWSBI announced they're coming out with an Eco White and Rose Gold, which is exciting. They've not done Rose Gold in a while. From what I understand, they have been trying to get the plating process down pat. So I think they've been working on that for a couple of years. So very excited to see those come back out. I think we'll have those in the next few weeks. Galen Leather has their Writer's Medic bag, which is a really interesting bag. I think actually have one here. I got a sample of one that I can kind of show you a little bit what it's all about. Truth be told, I haven't used this and carried this around fully myself, but anyway, so it's a very just Instagram fantastic kind of product that you can wear it as a strap. I'm assuming this works as kind of a hip strap like this. I don't know if you can actually make this thing up. It has a loop down here that you can supposedly make it up into a backpack. It doesn't really fit on my shoulders. I'm a rather broad-shouldered individual. And then this thing's just a little over $200, FYI. But then this part folds down, and you can have all your notebooks and pens and various other things in here. So very cool, very rustic. Pretty neat if you're into this kind of thing. So not really a lot of products like this that I'm aware of in the writing world. So that's pretty neat. I don't know what the availability is going to be like on these because there's just not that many of them around and it's a brand new product, but we're going to try it out, see what y'all think. You know, is it worth, you know, $220 or whatever it is for a leather writing bag? I don't have a clue. I think so, but I don't really know. We believe in it enough to give it a try, and you all can tell us what you think when you get these things in your hands. So, and then what else is coming? The Lamy All-Star Tourmaline. Got a video on that out before I left for break. We're going to have the pen, ink, and a notebook to match for the first time. So that's pretty cool. Those I think are going to be coming in the next few weeks. So I don't think you'll have to wait too far into February, maybe even the end of January. I'm not 100% sure. It all depends, but it doesn't look like it's going to be delayed at least. So that's pretty exciting. Those of you who are into that pen, it doesn't sound like you have to wait too much longer. I just don't have an exact date for you yet. So there you go. Let's get into this week's questions, shall we? Starting out with pen and writing questions. Oi Hungringaga, forgive me if I mispronounced that, which I'm surely did, from Instagram. What happens when you finally try every ink and pen? How do you keep up the penthusiasm? Gotta love the punism there. I guess at that point I'll just retire. You know, I'll kind of lived it all, seen it all, and I will have nothing else to going on. No, I'm taking this question kind of in the spirit of Hans Gruber's quote from Die Hard. When Alexander saw the breadth of his domain, he wept for there no more worlds to conquer. Kind of meaning that like the penthusiasm is really around trying new stuff, right? I mean, for sure, that is a really exciting part of the whole experience and one that I do enjoy quite a bit myself, as my desk is almost literally covered in pens that have are new things that I'm getting to know and spend time with. I do really love that. But I thought this is also a fun opportunity to work some math into the Q&A here for you. Now, I'm not a super mathematician, so forgive me if y'all catch any mistakes in any of my math, but I thought, what the heck, let's just run with this question. So if we take every pen SKU that we have here, so I'm talking every variant of color and nib size, because that was just honestly the easiest way for me to kind of slice it up. Every single one, model, color, nib, all that, that math will be a little easier. It's roughly around 2,500 different pens, okay? Which is kind of a lot, right? And then ink, you know, we have samples and bottles and all this, but just different colors, different types of ink, it's probably around 700, okay, roughly. So if I can just experience one of each of these, right? So that's 2,500 experiences, because you take an ink, you put it in a pen, you're trying one of every pen, you'll use the ink multiple times because 700 is less than 2,500, but either way, you'll get to experience them all sooner or later. So let's say that I'm gonna do one a day, right? You know, it's one a day, you get a chance to carry it around, experience it, you know, try it on different papers and use it throughout your day. So this is like you're kind of casually using it, but then you got to clean it out and do the whole thing. You know, it would take me 7 years, close to 7 years, if I did it every single day, one new pen ink combo. You know, but there's a lot of new products coming out too. That's just what we currently carry. So considering that, looking at last year, it's kind of mixed. I didn't completely dissect this, but you know, I would estimate we carried around 1,400 new SKUs last year. SKU stands for what does SKU stand for? I can never remember. I use the acronym so much. Standard something units. Oh my gosh, I'm terrible. I should know that. That's all right. You'll know it in 4 seconds in the comments because a bunch of you will remember it. Anyway, standard something unit. So around 1,400 total last year, but when you consider just isolating out various pen ink combos, 800 or so is probably about roughly how many new pens and nib and all that options that we had last year. So let's say conservatively moving forward, it's going to be 500 a year that we continue to add, roughly. I don't know if that's the case, but it's just made for easier math. So if I go with the whole one a day thing, that math kind of doesn't work because 500 a year is more than 365. So I immediately have to up my one a day thing to be more than that, picking up the pace. So that would be 1.37 SKUs per day just to keep up with the new things that are coming out. So I wouldn't make any progress on the things that we're already carrying. So let's kick it up a notch. If I do double it and do 2 a day, okay? 2 pen things a day, it would take me 3,969 days or 10.87 years to get caught up. And then even then, after my 10.87 years, I'll still have roughly 1.37 SKUs per day coming out new that will keep me plenty busy. So it never really stops, right? Assuming the world doesn't collapse and the fountain pens don't get wiped off the face of the earth by a meteor. So let's expand that beyond just the Goulet pens catalog, because there are other things that we don't carry here, right? That number is drastically going to increase. So we don't have everything. It could easily triple, quadruple. I don't really know how many things out there total in the world exists in terms of pen and ink that we don't carry. It's probably a pretty significant number. We try to carry a lot, but we don't have everything. So if you wanted to experience a pen and ink currently, every pen and ink currently made in the world, it would easily be a full-time commitment if you could ever even accomplish it. That's taken out just all the logistics of actually coordinating that and money and all these different things. But that's just if you experience everything possible once. If you really want to go nuts, and I did this math just for fun, let's talk about possible combinations, right? So if you have 2,500 pens times 700 inks, not even counting the new stuff, because that math just broke my brain and it was getting too late last night as I was trying to figure this out. That's roughly 1.75 million combinations, or 3 combinations a day for 1,600 years. So that's not really possible. So let's say we want to get it to a reasonable amount of time. I would have to increase it to 120 combinations a day every day for the next 40 years. So roughly, if I had to work 14 hours a day, that's 1 new combination every 7 minutes. So I just better clean my pens really fast. If I factor in the new products, then let's just say it's going to be half that or so. I'd have to clean pens and ink something up new every 3 minutes for 14 hours a day for 40 years. To experience everything, just of the things that we have at Goulet. So let's just say if I, at that point, haven't run out of penthusiasm, then I probably would never want to see another pen again after 40 years of 14 hours a day. That's not even counting like vintage pens, custom grinds, all these other things, and then you factor paper in there too, can vary up the experience. The whole pen and ink, experimentation thing effectively becomes inconceivably infinite, in terms of all practicality. I'm sure there's some math that's workable of all these different factors, but I didn't do that math. So bringing it all back to the fact that, the enjoyment of fountain pens is not solely based on just trying new things, right? Because if that was the case, I would try one thing and then set it aside and never use it again. That is definitely not the case. Even for somebody like me who part of my job, so to speak, is to be trying new stuff constantly, I still revisit old stuff. It's not like I only carry around the newest, latest, greatest thing. I have some old standbys that I do. I'm probably falling into somewhere of like the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, if you're familiar with that. It's a rule that applies to a lot of different parts of your life. You will, roughly spend 80% of your time doing 20% of whatever it is. So you probably have 20% of your collection that you carry around or use with you 80% of the time, and vice versa. The rest of your 80% will use 20% of your time. So all that to say, just as you're acquiring things, you're going to be revisiting old stuff, rediscovering things as you get more pen experience, and just your life in general changes. You're going to appreciate things. I used to only use stub nibs when I first started out. I had nothing to do with extra fines and nothing to do with flex or any of that kind of stuff. But over time, I've really learned to appreciate all these things and getting into custom grinds and architects and all these other cool things I've discovered over time. And then I revisit old things and try out new stuff, and you just get appreciation for things just as you get more experience and your own perspective is enriched from trying out all these new pens. When you revisit old stuff, you get a whole new lot in life. So you continue to rediscover stuff. So for me at least, I think the interesting part about fountain pens, there's always going to be something exciting and new. Being a blue-blooded American myself, it's like. If you're familiar with the show How I Met Your Mother, with Barney Stinson, the character in there, he has a phrase that says, "New is always better." Sometimes that can feel accurate to the way that we tend to think about things. And of course, me being a proprietor of writing instruments and an American retailer, I would be self-serving by saying, yes, you should always get the newest, latest, greatest thing, because then all your hopes and dreams will be fulfilled until the next thing comes out. But no, in all practicality, you can own like one pen or 4 pens and be perfectly satisfied. It's not about always acquiring the next new thing. There is definitely excitement around that, and there can be a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment in that process if you have kind of an obsessive collectible nature, like I found that I have in many areas of my life, not just pens. But anyway, that can be an enjoyable kind of journey in and of itself. But there are many, many ways to enrich your fountain pen experience, not just by acquiring new stuff. So if I can be of any, if I can be of any use to you at all, let it be as nothing more than just an example of somebody who has spent really just a ton of time, like literally devoted like pretty much most of my waking hours, more than any one probably single act. I've spent most of my waking hours over the last 10 plus years towards pens, fountain pens, and pen education and these things. If you take that amount of time that I've invested in there and put that into the amount of time that a normal human being would have to spend time with their pens, it would easily be your entire lifetime of like free time and kind of hobby time, lifestyle time that you have, unless you're maybe in the fountain pen business. But even still, I'm in it 10 years and I'm still just as fired up as I was on day one, maybe even more so, just because I appreciate it more and it's so much richer to me now than it was back then. So I think that, yeah, even if you kind of, your interest waxes and wanes on the new product stuff, there's so many avenues to explore, and not even just with getting new stuff, but then how you use them. They're instruments, so you can write with them. You can enjoy what you actually do with them every bit as much, if not more, than the products themselves. So really fun exercise. I'm glad you asked that question. Let me really go down the rabbit trail of some math stuff. But to answer your question in a way that didn't address anything that I talked about with the math stuff, I think that, you can have a lot of penthusiasm that can be related or not at all to having tried every single pen and every single ink out there. All right, next question is from Jackie O on Facebook. It puzzles me why so many mass-produced low-end and, of course, many high-end pens have ebonite feeds, but almost no mid-range pens do. Low-end, I'm thinking primarily Indian-made pens, have more malleable stamped steel nibs, which might conform to a less precise ebonite feed. ABS feeds, plastic feeds, can be mass-produced with great precision to match higher quality European nibs. Am I onto something or am I overthinking it? First off, I want to just start by kind of redirecting you a bit, because your logic is just a little bit in reverse. So it's not the nib that is conforming to the feed, it's actually the other way around. The feed is conforming to the nib. Yes, feeds are very hard, but nibs are also very hard too. And if you think about it in terms of like the low end, high end, all that kind of stuff, your high end pens are usually going to have gold nibs or some other kind of, softer type of metal. Your low end pens are usually going to have steel nibs. Steel's actually harder than gold. So the higher end pens are actually more likely, those nibs are more likely to conform, as it were, just in the fact that the metal is softer. And that's why it has a springier feel and stuff like that. So if there was any nib conforming to the feed, it would actually be on the higher end stuff, not on the lower end stuff. So that's actually not what's happening here. The feed, the reason ebonite feeds, or part of the reason ebonite feeds are so good in pens, is the fact that you can heat them up and they will conform to the nib better than plastic will. Plastic has to be heated hotter. It's not as malleable. It's easier to damage plastic. Usually what they do is they more precision. They injection mold the plastic. It's incredibly consistent. You can much more mass produce them. That's why you're seeing them. And your question prompted me to explore, like, what exactly is mass produced? What does that even mean, really? And it is kind of an interesting question. It was a term that came around, especially around the time of the Ford Model T and the Ford, like the assembly line process during the Industrial Revolution. essentially mass-produced. You can slice it up a bunch of different ways. We can interpret it however we mean that to be in the fountain pen world. But essentially it means that you are producing like batches of single pieces of something, usually highly automated, so you have fewer like hand craftsmanship involved. Highly automated, a bunch of pieces of something, and it moves down kind of a production line, and then it's all kind of being assembled together. So that's essentially mass-produced. I've actually had the privilege of touring, I think now 8 different fountain pen manufacturing facilities that vary in size from essentially someone's garage to something as elaborate as Lamy, as you saw in the Lamy How It's Made video. A multi-100,000 square foot facility with rooms filled with fully automated machines. So I've really seen the spectrum on it. You get quite a spectrum with fountain pen manufacturers. Most fountain pen manufacturers, and I'm talking all but essentially like the independent craftsmen who are like one person selling something at a pen show. Most of those have some element of mass production to them, just because the efficiencies, the economies of scale of producing one piece of something over and over and over again, even if it's just one person, it's so much more efficient to tool one piece at a time. And I think this is something kind of unique with fountain pens, is that there's so many different parts and pieces that are actually rather complicated, more than you would think, to assemble and manufacture in a given pen, and different materials and things like that, that it's really not effective or efficient in any way to non-mass produce, in like the definition of mass produce, as opposed to like a bespoke handcrafted, one artist produces one product start to finish. That's really the opposite of mass produced, right? So you think if you're a painter and you're painting one painting from start to finish, and then you move on, you paint the next painting from start to finish. That is individually handcrafted start to finish, right? Really, I don't know anybody that's manufacturing pens that way. Maybe some of the independent folks who have backlogs of like a year on an individual pen, but most everybody else has some element of mass production in there because it's just far more efficient. They're going to be able to produce, more than, it can take a while to make one pen from start to finish. And so you're even at the smallest scales, you're going to have an element of mass production in there. Anyway. Went down a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but the whole thing with the ebonite feeds, that's really your question, right? So again, it's not about the nibs conforming to the feed. The feed actually conforms more to the pen, to the nib. Or in some cases, if you have a nib that's not made that well and a feed that's not made that well, it won't conform either way, and it just won't write that great. That's more often the case with really, really inexpensive pens. But honestly, the really inexpensive pens that you have these days are still so much better in quality than the really expensive pens you had like way back in the day. Like the quality of alloys that we have in the steel, the tolerances in manufacturing, like unless there's just like some gross, stuff that's missing, like people are missing quality control type stuff, it's still far better. Like fountain pens that are made today are far better, far more reliable than they were, decades ago. Or maybe more than just a few decades ago. Anyway, so that's kind of evolved just in general. The quality of manufacturing as a whole is much higher than it probably used to be in many ways. So I will recognize the fact, though, that there definitely seems to be a gap on some of these pens. Like some of these, especially like you said, some of the Indian-made companies, we don't really have a lot of those. I know we have Noodler's pens. That was really one of the big ones that came out with ebonite feeds at a very economical price. Nathan Tardif himself is very passionate about having ebonite feeds and very affordable pens. Part of the reason he went with the ebonite feed on pens like this Ahab or the original Nib Creeper is because he made his pens with flex nibs. He designed a steel flex nib, which was very revolutionary for its time, around 8 or 9 years ago. And I guess it was around 9 years ago at this point that he was doing that. Is that right? 8 or 9 years ago. But anyway, so the ebonite allowed him to have a wider ink channel and to heat set it so that you could adjust it yourself, you could tinker with it, you could swap nibs out, and you could have that increased ink flow that's demanded from a flex pen. Now, I think there are other Indian manufacturers out there. I don't know a lot of them. Some of them have flex nibs as well. It's up for debate as to how unique they are from noodlers. I think, I'm not even going to go down that road. I know that Nathan has designed his pens, and then I think maybe others have been heavily inspired by some of his stuff. But anyway, his were the first ones that I ever saw come out like that. So I'm not really greatly aware of too many beyond noodlers, and maybe just a couple others that have ebonite feeds at that low a price point, like that, $15, $20, $30 price point. So when you're saying, why do so many mass-produced low-end pens? I would kind of argue that there's actually not that many mass-produced low-end pens with ebonite feeds. It's really a handful. And I think in terms of the big picture, in terms of how many fountain pens are sold, how many are out there in the world, the number of low-end, low-priced pens with ebonite feeds is actually a remarkably small percentage of the total. So I think it's maybe just a couple suppliers, a couple manufacturers that have, for whatever reason, I know Nathan is very driven by price consciousness. He doesn't run his company in a way that really makes much of a profit because that's not what motivates him. He's driven by economy. He's driven by getting as many pens and as much ink in people's hands as possible. And he does so in the absolute most frugal way that you possibly could, in a way that I don't think pretty much anybody else in the business world or fountain pen world would be willing to do it the way that he does it, because he does it at great personal sacrifice. Anyway, so other manufacturers, I would have to believe that there's some other, hugely compromising, whether personal or otherwise way that they're accomplishing that at such a low price. It still is curious to me, why there aren't more kind of mid-range ebonite feed pens. Theoretically, it could happen. If you can do it on a really low-end pen, why couldn't you do it on a mid-range pen? Certainly higher-end pens, I'm thinking specifically like some of the Italian manufacturers. Aurora is one. I've seen their facility. I've seen how they make their ebonite feeds, and they are hard to do. Like, they're extremely laborious. I've seen monograppa as well. So I've got a monograppa. This is the shiny lines that we had a couple years ago. They had ebonite feed as well. I've seen their process. It is not hand. There's different ones that are hand done. There's some elements of handwork, but a lot of it's machined. It's a very difficult process. You're working with a natural material here, so there are natural defects that happen in the material. I think there's around 30% waste in the process, just not even from the selection. Once you get what you think is a good rod of ebonite for making feeds, just in the process of manufacturing, there's bubbles, there's voids, there's other things that just cause waste to happen by the time. I think it's like monograppa. I think they said they have like 10 or 11 steps in their process for making a single ebonite feed. And they do it, by machine and stuff like that. But still, it's a pretty meticulous process, and the reject rate is pretty high. So all that, the higher cost of ebonite, the increased waste, and then just the handwork of heating it and fitting it to the nib, it's a lot of extra time and work. Now, theoretically, that could happen in a mid-range pen. If you can do it on a high-end pen, sure, yes. You could probably take just the fixed cost of doing that work, kind of build it in to, a mid-range pen, raise the price however much it is. I don't know exactly dollar for dollar how much it costs to put an ebonite feed on a pen. I have to imagine it's somewhere in the several dollars to maybe $10 at the manufacturing side. I don't really know. I'm totally guessing. And theoretically, yes, you think, $10, I could absorb that. But there's a lot of other incremental costs that happen after that just initial raw manufacturing cost. So in the end, it could be triple that. It could be $30 more. Would you pay $30 more on a Lamy Safari to have an ebonite feed, if that was even possible? I don't know. Certainly not as many people would be willing to pay that much for an ebonite feed. So I think some of it comes into, when you get into these mass-produced pens, you got to do what has more mass appeal. And when you're trying to hit a certain price point, the reliability of a plastic feed versus an ebonite feed with all these variables, it's just very challenging. So they do it so that they can get the economies of scale and get that price down. You could argue that if you had a bunch of, not just that ebonite feed, but there's a bunch of other steps you could argue that should be less mass produced. You could argue that, you know, these mid-range pens may not be so mid-range anymore once you add these extra things in. So it is kind of curious to me. I you know, in talking to some various manufacturers, a lot of it is they just don't have the equipment, facilities, resources, interest, whatever it may be, demand for ebonite feeds on these specific pens, because some of them you would have to change the whole design of the inside of the pen to be able to accommodate ebonite. You couldn't just take a design of what is, you know, say a plastic feed and turn that, you know, exact thing into ebonite. Because it may just not be possible. You know, whenever you're machining something instead of injection molding it, there are likely going to be different stress points. There's going to be different, you know, things that would happen. The tooling that would be required to make certain things like an ink channel or whatever on a plastic feed, or if you did that on a machine like ebonite feed, it just may not be possible versus an injection molding. So I don't know. We're getting into an area of manufacturing that I don't understand completely fully, but to me, it's less about why aren't they on mid-range pens. It's more about like how in the world are these on low-end pens? I have no idea. Literally don't know. But anyway, that's my perspective on the matter. All right, question number 3. It's a Verp 40 Fidgen on Instagram. What was the first pen that Brian inked up and the first pen that Brian wrote with in 2020? I have to think about that because I've been kind of on a blitz so far this year. Even though I'm only a couple days in. I think the first one of the year was probably a Jinhao Shark that I inked up for my daughter. She has a pink shark at home, and I think she wanted to write something, thank you notes or whatever. She had her birthday party, and you know she wanted to write something. Maybe she was writing a card for a friend. I don't remember exactly what the situation was, but she wanted a pen, and it needed to be inked up. So I inked it up for her. I'm not 100% certain that was it, but I'm pretty sure. And I think it was with Lamy Crystal Azurite, nice purple, dark purple ink. She likes that color. What can I say? I don't know that I actually wrote with that pen. I may have done a couple of scribbles with it, but I was inking it up for her. So I may have an actual separate one. I may have done a couple scribbles. So whether you count that, but I've been daily carrying a Visconti Homo Sapiens Skylight because I've been trying to vet that one and see if I like it better than the regular Homo Sapiens. And I did something I've never done on my regular Homo Sapiens. I actually polished up the bronze on my Skylight because I was like, you know, I think I'll polish this one. Because my other one I've left completely natural. Where is it? Right here. And you know, the clip is got its wear. I've been wearing away the logo on the side. You can see the difference between the Skylight. You can see the difference just in the ebonite, how oily my old one is, which is this one. This is my old one. But anyway, so yeah, you can see it. I polished it up. My clip is showing its age, which I like. It gives it personality. So I'm trying to put some wear on the Skylight as well. So we'll see. I do like the increased ink capacity. That's like the main appeal that I really like about this one. So yet to be seen whether it'll permanently take its place. But that was the first pen that I think I wrote with. Had Robert Oster Blue Water Ice in there because that's kind of my go-to carry around ink. Has been for a while. And then I've been just working with just a ton of writing samples for Nibnook, the various S2 DuPonts, Monteverde Conklin. I did a Piniter Avatar Extra Fine. I did the Platinum Perfantes. Yeah, the Mayoras. Just a bunch. I've been doing at least probably 20 Nibnooks. It's been great. All right, Brian DeGainer Repair on Instagram. Do you have any favorite discontinued fountain pens or brands? Yes, there's probably a lot that I could lump into this. It's a very hard question for me. So I tried to keep my list narrowed down and still didn't narrow it down very much. But anyway, there's lots of old school, like vintage stuff I could mention, you know, pretty much all wet noodle nibs. Sure, why not bring those back? But anyway, I think the Parker 51 is cool as heck. You know, I've got that one. It's one of my all-time fave vintage pens. Though that itch has been scratched a little bit with the Jinhao 51A because it is heavily inspired by the Parker 51. So we stock those now, and it's significantly cheaper than getting a vintage Parker 51. Still, it's not the same, but it's close enough. So that is kind of cool to have like a somewhat modern equivalent. The Schaefer snorkel, I love this just as kind of like a technophile and somebody who really appreciates the technology. So if you're not familiar with the Schaefer snorkel, it was a pen that was designed so that you wouldn't have to submerge the entire nib into your ink. It has this little tiny thing. I don't know if I can show you, but it's a snorkel. So it just kind of comes out. It's like a little mosquito, thing. And then, once it goes all the way out, you continue doing it, and that engages the piston mechanism. And then you draw the ink up, and then when you're done, you just keep twisting the piston mechanism, and it withdraws back into the pen. Very cool design, rather thin pen for how much technology is happening inside of there, but they do not make these anymore. From what I understand, the engineering costs were high, repairs were a nightmare, but still, really cool pen. So that one's pretty neat. I'm a big fan of the Pilot M90. I love the design of it. I'm actively trying to get Pilot to bring this one back or make some variant of it. Super cool pen. Part of what I love is the design of it's a pocket pen, which is always cool, but the design of the nib, which is integrated. It's a stainless steel body pen. The nib is integrated into the body. Super cool. And then just like the angular kind of design of that feed. How cool does that look? Looks awesome. So these pens now are selling like 4 or 5 times what they originally did on eBay and whatnot. So very cool pen. Love that one. Getting into like more brands, of course, RIP Omos. Omos is a particularly challenging brand because we just started carrying this brand like a year before they went defunct. So they're no longer around, but we got a little taste of what they had to offer. I really loved their pens. I was super getting into them, and then they disappeared. So that was really sad, but this is the Ogiva Alba. This is the one that we debuted with. Big fan. Of course, I love the blue. They had a great teal as well. Really nice pen. So I do miss that. Miss the whole brand. The Omos 360. Really cool triangular pen. Pretty darn neat. Let's see here. What else did we have? The Lamy Delta. I'll throw that one in there too. Delta, just kind of as a whole as a brand. Never really got to know them quite as well. We sold a few of their pens, but we didn't really get to pick up steam with them, especially on their higher end stuff because they went defunct as well. But anyway, we got a little taste of it. Of course, I had the Lamy Safari Dark Lilac, which every time I get a chance to with Lamy, I tell them like, you should bring this back as a regular edition. That would be super great. Anyway, so really cool pen. Love it. It was the first Purple Safari I think that they'd ever done, and they really knocked it out of the park with this one. So that one's good. Would love to see that one come back as well. You just asked me favorite discontinued ones, not the ones that I would bring back, but of course I would want to bring them back. It just kind of goes hand in hand with the question. And the Dark Lilac ink was really nice too, though the Lamy Crystal Azurite is very, very close. So that one kind of scratches that itch for me a little bit. Love the Homo sapiens, Visconti Homo sapiens London Fog. I think this is one of the nicest special edition, limited edition Homo sapiens colors that they've done. And yeah, I do really like this one. So that one's kind of cool. I've got this one inked up with some blue. Love the swirls, of course the blue, the smokiness of it. I don't know, just all around great looking pen. And then just the hook safe lock mechanism that they have on the Homo sapiens I love anyway, but in particular when you have these limited edition Homo sapiens that have the resin grips and all that instead of the volcanic resin. The volcanic resin has just a little more resistance to it, right? Because of just the material. But when you have these resins, oh man, that hook safe lock action is just like, it's divine. Really good, like that one. Little throwback here to Pelican, the M800 Ocean Swirl. Oh my gosh, as soon as I saw this color come out, I saw the email blast, and I saw this color, I was like, this is gonna be a winner. And I'm absolutely keeping one of these. So I did, love the color, love it. They did a great job with it. So missed this one. It was just a lot of these special editions and limited editions and stuff. They still make the M800 and have all kinds of models and stuff. And then the last one I have in the bunch here is Lamy 2000 Bauhaus. So for years I've been kind of pining for a different color Lamy 2000. I was like, it's been over 50 years. Try something new, guys. So they did this one. However, it was limited edition. There were so few of them, especially that made it to the US. So if you do have one, you were very, very fortunate. We ended up getting such a small handful. We had to do a lottery. We'd never done a lottery before. and it was kind of a nightmare to manage, just like we thought it would be. But it was literally, there was so many more people that wanted this pen than what we had. That was literally the only way that we could manage it. So I never really got to talk about it much. I never really got to praise it for the color that it is. It was pretty expensive, you know, it's like $500 for this pen, and it came with a commemorative thing, and it's limited edition, all that kind of stuff. But, you know, personally, I would rather them lower the price, make way more of them, and just come out with it. I don't know all the details of manufacturing. I don't know if it's you know, really cumbersome to do that, but still really, really cool pen. I love it. Yeah. Let's see here. For the most part, I would say that, you know, most of the pens that are discontinued are that way for a reason. You know, they either run their course or they were limited edition. So, you know, the whole point of limited edition is that not everybody gets one. That's what makes it limited, and it's more special. But the great thing is new stuff is coming out all the time, and there's going to be a lot more new and exciting things to come in the future. So even if you missed out on some of these faves, you know, there's always secondhand, and then you can always look forward to the next thing. And just keep asking for the old stuff that you love. You never know what once was old can become new again. All right, got a business question here. This is from Brad the Bear 1 on Instagram. What do you think is the most polarizing fountain pen, ink, and paper that Goulet Pens sells? Well, I think clearly this polarizing question is polarizing in and of itself, because pretty much whatever I say, you're going to be able to debate with me. So I'm curious to hear what everybody else thinks. I'm just going to invite it. Just go ahead in the comments. Go ahead and say whatever's on your mind, whatever you think is most polarizing. From my experience, this is me as a retailer. So most of what tends to be polarizing is stuff that like people give us direct feedback about, and also what we've observed out there in the community. Sometimes that doesn't always line up though. But anyway, I think when it comes to pens, pretty much anything with a flex, anything flex is going to be polarizing. Really doesn't matter the brand. Anything flex, just expectations go through the roof. Those who really understand flex and their expectations are proper then tend to react to the people who have unrealistic expectations. Debates ensue, and there's all kinds of polarization happening. Doesn't matter the price point, but well, I shouldn't say it doesn't matter the price point. It pretty much happens at every price point, but particularly the lower price flex pen you have, the more polarized it's going to get, the more debate there's going to be, because you're kind of getting into people's hands who, you know, maybe are newer to the hobby, or it's more of an impulse buy, and then they don't maybe know as much or invest as much time into it, or maybe they do invest time into it and they get frustrated because they've spent so much time on a $20 pen and it frustrates them or whatever. You know, Noodler's Pens has taken a lot of flack for that over the years, specifically when Noodler's was like the only, you know, available, affordable flex fountain pen. Now there are more options, but boy, for a like 4 or 5 year run there in the early to mid 2010s, Noodler's was getting all the flack. Now OmniFlex, you could throw that in there too. That gets plenty of conversation out there in the world. There's others that get mentioned too, but those two are the really big ones, at least from Goulet pens. So yep, lots of polarization going on there. Still happens to this day, though. It does get better over time because expectations get adjusted, more people have education and knowledge and share, and we get smarter about how we share these things, and it tends to equalize, though it never really goes away. As far as ink goes, I think Noodler's, again, has long been one of the most polarizing brands. Part of that's been kind of Nathan's mission. So behind his whole company, he's not really there to make a lot of profit. He wants to encourage writing and really prompt, I would say specifically political discussion out there in the community. That's why he's got so many kind of politically driven themes behind his ink colors. Though he's taken his foot off the gas there a little bit just in recent years. I think it's been such a hotbed of political stuff going on. Anyway, he hasn't felt the need to really stir the pot. So good call on his part, I think. But still, you know, just the even all that stuff aside, just kind of the boundary pushing, you know, nature of the ink properties that he's done. He was really one to drive hard in the ink permanence, and then he's gotten to UV resistance and UV light exposure with black lights, and you know, just some really interesting and like ink that halos and really interesting stuff, color changing and things like that. He's doing things with inks that not any other company really tries to do, or at least initially. Though interestingly, he stayed away from shimmering inks, which is now like So many other companies have shimmering inks, but that's the one thing he didn't really want to do. He was like adamantly against putting particulate in ink. And so he hasn't done that. But yet there's other brands that do, and they thrive, and who knows. But anyway, I think one of the, thinking historically of what I can recall in the recent memory, Noodler's Bay State Blue has been kind of a poster child for particularly stunning, also particularly challenging, troublesome inks. A lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that the chemical property of that ink is different. So it cleans up with bleach, which is not conventional for most other fountain pen inks. Most other fountain pen inks clean better with like an ammonia-based solution, but the Bay State series of inks clean better with bleach. So most people don't really know that, and so they try to clean it with their conventional cleaning methods, and it does not budge. And thus it's known as like destroying pens and so on and so forth. In fact, I don't know if the ban is still in place, but on Fountain Pen Network, when I was active on there years ago, there was so much conversation about Noodler, specifically about Bay State Blue, destroying pens, yada, yada, yada. They actually banned discussion of it on the forum. They were like, this topic has been exhausted to death. Like, we're going to lock all the threads that currently have it in there, and we're going to delete any new threads that pop up asking if Noodler's Bay State Blue will destroy your pens. I'm curious. I actually didn't check before I filmed this if that ban is still in place, but it certainly was, 5 or 6 years ago when I was last more cognizant of it. These days, you do end up with shimmering inks and stuff. There's no one ink or one brand that I think takes a lot of flack for that. I think it's more just the concept or the principle of shimmering inks that tends to polarize people maybe a little bit more. And even just the property of permanence as well, going back to Noodler's a little bit, that tends to be a little bit polarizing, though it's not central to any one particular ink. I think a very popular ink that does get a little bit of attention is Organic Studio Nitrogen. It's really taken off here for us in the last couple of years. It's a highly, highly saturated ink that tends to get on everything. So there's people with like pictures of nitrogen on their dog and nitrogen on their door handles and their tissues and that ink tends to travel with you if you get any on your fingers and it smears and stuff like that. But it's just such a stunning color. So anything like that where there's kind of an extreme property that has some sort of trade-off, which they all do, a lot of people feel that the trade-off's not worth it, so they tout the extremism of the trade-off. Other people love so much the property of the ink and the way that it performs that they compromise on those trade-offs, and then the two tend to butt heads. So there you go. Paper, I think people in general are a little less fired up about paper. There's not like a universally like rallying cry for or against any given paper so much. But I think probably Tomoe River maybe takes the prize for most polarizing paper. I think because it's rather unique, so it's more identifiable maybe than some other papers that are out there. It's very, very thin. It gets a lot of hype because you can really draw out a lot of shading and sheening and shimmering properties, which again kind of couples hand in hand with the extreme nature of maybe some of these boundary pushing inks. And then that tends to often get paired up with Tomoe River. So I don't know how much of that is truly the paper versus the ink or whatever. The two often go hand in hand. There's a relationship between paper and ink, right? No one's going to look at a paper by itself and go, what is this all about? It's how it performs with the ink. So there's an inextricable tie there between those two. But I think Tomoe River probably, it's a little more expensive maybe, and it's very, very thin. Some people don't like the thin. They don't like the show through that you get with some of the thinness. A lot of people do like it, but maybe they don't like the dry time or the sheen or all these different things. But I think that paper probably more than any other maybe catches some attention. There you go. That's what I think about that question. I'm going to finish this out with a couple of personal questions. One is from Junikiki on Twitter. One Ikiki on Twitter. Are you inspired to write and have a pen, or do you get inspired because you have a pen? Okay. So do you inspired? Let me read this question again because I interpreted it differently a little bit just now as I read it. Are you inspired to write and have a pen, or do you just get inspired? So I'm taking this as, do you get inspired to write because you have a pen? I centralize it around the writing portion. So do you get inspired to write and thus grab a pen, or I guess speaking specifically about me, or do I have the pen and then the pen itself inspires me to write? Okay. For me, I think it's really both. I really view these pens as writing instruments, right? I'm also a musician. So I've played a lot of instruments throughout my life. And I've had experiences where, hey, sometimes I need to perform something at a school or a church or whatever for family. So you need to perform something, therefore you need to sing or get an instrument or piano or whatever the heck. And you get the tool to accomplish the job. The inspiration comes from the performance and what you're trying to do. So I definitely have that happen in the pen world because I have things I want to write down. I have stuff I want to express, or I'm taking a meeting and I want to, jot things down. And the pen is the tool for the job. So the need dictates the tool. But I also, my desk is covered in pens all the time. I'm playing around with new ones. I test new nibs, and I certainly will just pick up the tool. And that inspires me to play with it and try out new things, much as if you were a musician and you just had your instrument, if you're a guitarist and you just have your guitar up there, on the guitar rack on your wall, and you see it there, and you're just kind of sitting there watching TV or whatever, and you're like, I'll pick up my guitar. And you start plinking around, and then you really get into it. Sometimes the tool and just the recognition of it can inspire you to pick up and start using that instrument. Other times it's because you're trying to perform or do something, or you're practicing, and it's the other way around. So it's definitely that way for me too. One thing that's interesting for me, I'm reading a book right now called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. Cal Newport's also the author of Deep Work, if you've heard of that book too. So I'm thinking a lot about the intentionality of the tools that I use and just we use in general. For sure, the focus of digital minimalism is about, not mindlessly using social media or mindlessly using, say, a smartphone or whatever piece of technology, playing video games. But really it's about doing so intentionally and thinking about, is this serving kind of the greatest purpose? Again, this whole concept of minimalism, I am definitely not a minimalist, as you can tell by just the amount of stuff surrounding me. But I do definitely resonate with the concept of intentionality. So with that in mind, I don't think that a fountain pen is always the best tool for the job. I use a computer, I use a phone, I use a lot of different things. But for sure, it is an instrument to me. I play a lot of different instruments, and I'll write with a lot of different instruments, fountain pens being one of them. Not one of them, but many, many, probably 98% of them. So with that in mind, I do very much enjoy the tactile process. So going back to this whole idea of the digital minimalism, right? So there are times when I'm on my phone, I'm on Instagram, I'm interacting with you all, I'm using technology right now to shoot this very video. It's great, I love it. I love the fact that I can do this. And I'm in this very, much this paradox of, here I am using the latest and greatest technology to share my love and promote and get you excited about these very tactile things that are actually not related at all to digital technology, right? And so it's really kind of fascinating, just the spot that I find myself in is really balancing between these analog and digital tools. So for me, it's great because I think it actually does speak to this intentionality behind the principle of this book that I'm reading right now, in the fact that it's not about going all or nothing on any one thing. It's about being very intentional. So for me, fountain pens, because I use them the way that I do, I'm actually very intentional when I write with them. I spend a little more time on my handwriting. I'm really thinking and kind of in a place of solitude in my own mind as I'm writing with fountain pens in a way that I'm not when I'm on the phone or maybe doing other things. So there are certain types of activities that I will do more with a fountain pen. And also when I'm writing with a fountain pen as opposed to doing other things, I tend to write differently and my brain just kind of functions on a different wavelength when using that medium as opposed to others. If I'm typing and I can do that much faster, you're gonna get much more stream of consciousness. Whereas when I'm doing fountain pen stuff, I can't physically write as fast as what my brain is thinking. So I will do more bullet points. I'll do more kind of big picture concepts. I'll cross things out, reorganize. I'll be more concise and pare things down, be a little more intentional about my words when I'm physically writing with a pen. So just different tools for different things. I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you prompted the question, but the answer at the end of the day is both. I'm often inspired in both directions. All right, last question for you for Q&A this week. This is from Dayna L on Facebook. Dayna asks, I recently discovered Q&A at episode 256. I went back and watched all of them from the beginning. Mercy me. Congratulations. That's really cool. I'm very honored by that. Not joking, very honored. I went back and watched all of them from the beginning and noticed early on that you referred to both yourself and Rachel as introverts. Keep in mind, I started this in August of 2013, so we're going on 6.5, 7 years now of doing these Q&As. Whew, makes me feel old. You'd see my weight fluctuate quite a bit of the time. Anyway, yes, we referred more to ourselves as introverts. By episode 170, you mentioned you were more of an extrovert, and more recently went so far as to say you get jazzed up from talking to people. What do you believe was the biggest factor to that change from introvert to extrovert? Great question. I think a lot of it just has to do with this point in my life where you've caught me, in this like late 20s into mid 30s, right? As I've been filming Q&A, and that's part of what I love about this Q&A process too, is like literally if you take what you did, which is an amazing commitment, go back and watch them all from the very beginning, you really get to see me grow and change over time. I don't often go back, nor do I really have the time to go back and re-watch all my old stuff like that. It would be wildly entertaining if I did, I'm sure. I'll watch bits here and there and I'm like, wow, I remember this. But anyway, a lot of it has to do, I think, with increased self-awareness and education. So maybe not so much that I've changed so drastically. I'm more aware of myself. I'm more aware of maybe what introvert, extrovert means, and maybe what introvert and extrovert actually is. Now that I have maybe a little more of a worldview, I've met more people, I have more perspective on such things. Specifically, I've had some personality testing that has happened within this time frame that has really helped to frame up and give me good language and good perspective on what these things mean. Specifically, Myers-Briggs is one that literally uses introvert, extrovert on like a spectrum and shows you that. So that probably around that 170 time frame, that's probably when I first started to do like a Myers-Briggs and I really had awareness. Now, keeping in mind when I grew up, just from my perspective, I grew up in a family of 4. I have an older sister. My sister is extremely extroverted, like way over the top extroverted. My dad was pretty extroverted too. My mother, much more introverted. I actually fell more in the camp with my mother. So I considered myself, in my worldview, which was rather small growing up, of being much more introverted. So I didn't have a huge network of friends. I really didn't do any organized sports as a kid. I really didn't do my first organized anything until I was in 6th grade. I was like 12 years old when I started band on clarinet. Not the most like outwardly extroverted activity. I did track when I was in 8th grade, shot put and discus, maybe a little more social, but still a rather individualized kind of sport. Really didn't get into much of an organized thing. I mean, I did band, which I guess you're kind of as a unit, but you're still playing your own instrument. So anyway, I was doing a lot of individualized, somewhat more reflective stuff. We lived in a more rural area, so there just weren't a lot of friends around. I think some of it was exposure. I was by perspective with my sister and my dad. I felt that I was a lot more introverted, but then I hadn't had a lot of exposure to like really introverted people. So it's been interesting, just learning that about myself. So on the Myers-Briggs, it's like, it takes extrovert and introvert and puts them on a spectrum. You can be like 100% extrovert or like 0%, which means you're maximum introvert. Like 50% is in the middle. I am 75%, which is like kind of halfway into the extroverted camp, which is pretty firmly in there. It's not like, okay, you're like 55%. Like, no, 75 is like, yeah, you're pretty extroverted. So that just really made me think, wow, am I really extroverted? And like, as I've evolved in this business, it started out was just me and Rachel in our house. And like we were interacting together and it was great. Rachel is much more introverted. She does not socialize much outside of the world. She'll be on these videos and she'll kind of turn it on, but she needs to like retreat and go like take a nap, because it just sucks the life out of her to be like on like that. That is now more so than any one test. I think that's my gauge for whether you're introverted or extroverted. And for me, like sitting here and talking to you, I'm by myself in this room, but I'm really like visualizing myself being like literally like on your TV in your living room or your computer or your smartphone, whatever it may be. Like I'm with you right now and I'm like excited, I'm talking to you. And I get kind of jazzed up just by that prospect. Or when I'm in meetings all day or I go to a networking event, I kind of get jazzed up, especially when I'm talking about something that I really know and love, like pens, really gets me fired up. Seeing now, if my wife and I knowing each other so well, she's much more introverted. She's kind of the opposite. She needs to retreat. She really turns on when she has like alone time and can really get in her own head and just pound out work. And then when she has a lot of things coming at her and a lot of people, she gets kind of worn down. So it's kind of the opposite a little bit. I'm this interesting mix probably. Other profiles we've done, not just Myers-Briggs. We've done DISC profile, StrengthsFinder, Enneagram, languages of appreciation. If you care about this, I'm a dominant D on the DISC. I'm like off the charts, which is the domineering, whatever personality type. Look up DISC if you want. StrengthsFinder, what am I? I'm futuristic. I forget the exact. I didn't look up my StrengthsFinder recently. Futuristic, and then accountability, responsibility, activator, and what's the other one? I can't remember what the fifth one is. There's 5 top things on that one. Dang, I forgot. Activator, not motivator. That's not a thing. Accountability, responsibility. I forgot. Command. That's what it is. Futuristic, I think, is 1. Command is number 2. Responsibility, activator. Whatever the other one is. I can't remember them all. My memory's not great, as you can tell. But anyway, so there's that. Enneagram, I'm an 8. And languages of appreciation, my dominant is acts of service. Voila, that's me. How does that relate to anything I was just talking about? So again, I don't know how much of this is related to me having actually changed. I think it's just having more awareness of myself, more perspective of myself around others. And then it's just a matter of my own personality. I'm kind of motivated by people and inspired by people, but yet I'm more task driven than kind of emotionally driven, if that makes sense. So I do find myself in kind of a rare, kind of interesting blend of I am extroverted and I get jazzed up by people, but it's not like the harmony and kind of the softer side of people that really is what fires me up and motivates me. It's actually more let's rally together again. That's like my command. Like, hey, we got this problem. Let's rally together. I'm going to come up with some crazy ideas and let's go conquer the world. Let's start selling fountain pens on the internet and create videos and rally up a community around that. That's a pretty unique blend of things to come together to make that a logical conclusion. But that's uniquely me, just kind of in that scenario. Obviously could not make that happen without a team. Not trying to say I made this all happen by any means, because chances are if it was just me, I would be, we always joke that Rachel and I, if we were like, driving a ship, you don't drive a ship, but you know what I mean. If you were navigating a ship, I would be like the captain, like, let's go here. But like the ship wouldn't be moving, the sails wouldn't be up, no one would be paddling. I'd be like, we need to go here. It's standing there alone. And Rachel's like the engine, behind the whole thing, helping it go. But, without kind of the vision, she would just like be going off in circles or driving into the shore or something. So we kind of joke about that as our 2 personalities. The 2 of us work together really well to both drive things and have a good direction to go. So anyway, there you go. I think, in general, you tend to learn about yourself as you age. In my mid-30s here, definitely don't have it all figured out. No one really does. But I've definitely learned a lot more about myself. I'm more comfortable with who I am. And learning kind of how that works in perspective with other people too. So there you go. My question of the week for you this week as I wrap up my first Q&A of 2020. If money and practicality were not a factor, no factor at all, how often would you want to acquire a new pen or ink or some kind of writing, thing? Are you driven by the pursuit of new, or do you think that you'd settle into a sweet spot after, X number of pen acquisitions or whatever? And kind of settle out? Where do you, just kind of knowing yourself, where do you think you'd settle in? I'm just kind of curious, speaking back to the first question I had in the Q&A here. Where do you fall? Me personally, very driven by new, obviously. Probably more on that spectrum, but I do have some old standbys that I absolutely love. So I don't know what my sweet spot number is, because I just keep going. I'm definitely a collector in that aspect. So anyway, go ahead and answer that if you're willing and able in the comments. Would love to hear that. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that if you haven't already. Really excited about what we're going to be able to do for you here in 2020. Still going at it, 10 years in. not slowing down. Very excited. Lots of good stuff will be in the works for this year. I know there's several manufacturers that we're talking to that have some cool things happening. So yeah, if you're into the pen thing, we're going to keep it going, keep it exciting. So keep giving us your feedback, keep interacting with me, keep interacting with our team, because we are all here for you. Thanks so much for watching, and right on.